Sydney had yet another massive protest at Town Hall, and I managed to visit it and experience it quite a fair bit. So I wanted to talk about what it was like this time around. I also managed to capture quite a lot of footage, which we will, of course, see in this video. This was a protest organized by the people against the visit of someone who I'm just going to refer to as President Genocide. I am, of course, referring to Isaac Herzog. He is the president of the genocidal apartheid state. And his visit was something brought about by our federal Labour government with our Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, and also, of course, our state Labour government, our New South Wales government, led by Chris Minns. Those are some names that I may refer to because I haven't actually done a script for this video. I'm just going off the seat of my pants. This protest, I think, now I'm not an expert on all of the protests that happened in Sydney, but I feel like this protest might be the largest we've ever had. And the reason why I feel this might be the case is that it's the only protest I've ever seen. Well, it's the only protest I can remember where the main area outside Town Hall in Sydney was already reaching capacity within 10 minutes of the starting time for this protest, to the point where we had people coming around to this area that is downstairs from the main area outside Town Hall. It's a smaller area. It's really there as just a secondary entrance point for the Town Hall train station. But in that area, the cops actually had essentially segregated a portion of the protesters away from the main area. And they really kept us, because I was a little bit late to the party, they really kept us at that area for quite some time. It did make it a little bit more difficult. Well, actually made it a fair bit more difficult to even understand what the speakers were saying at that point in time. So we had two groups. The main group that was already, doing their thing, doing the chants, yelling, clapping, booing at various names and all that jazz. But then we also had this secondary group, and apparently there was even a tertiary group outside the KFC at Town Hall, I believe. I'm not entirely sure what was going on there. But either way, there was a fair bit of separation, of course, ostensibly to just keep people relatively safe and not fall from like a flight of stairs, for example. So there is a little bit of merit in that with the police action. So we were there in the secondary area for quite some time. I think for at least a solid hour or so, because it got to a point where we saw a lot of people actually leave the protest via the flight of stairs with which we were separated from. And that, of course, started to enrage quite a lot of people in this secondary area because the premise of keeping this area segregated was just simply to make sure that the main area was not overflowing. So when you have a lot of people leaving, it would make a lot of sense to let some people in. Thus, we started seeing quite a lot of chants of "let us in" and stuff like that. And it got me thinking at that point. An interesting thought to me was that it felt to me like the New South Wales police were essentially playing the role of the genocidal apartheid state in how they were essentially separating groups of people and segregating them from the main area, much like how the genocidal apartheid state is separating a lot of people in Gaza and, well, actually murderizing them in a variety of ways as well. But at least at the time, I did not bear witness to the cops going that fast. There was that. At some point, I actually did manage to get right up to the front of the wall of cops. It was quite interesting to see such an overwhelming police presence. Well, maybe not overwhelming per se, because there was definitely a lot more people than there were cops, but obviously when you have a lot of cops, it does seem a little bit intimidating, not gonna lie. It was definitely a wall of cops, and layers of cops. And in fact, one of the more sort of amusing observations made by some of the protesters that I was able to hear behind me was that some of the federal cops, I believe, or at least some of the more specialized cops who were wearing like black shirts and everything, for some reason they all seem to have the same hairstyle, the same mustache. I'm thinking, maybe if you want to be in that kind of tactical unit, there is not only the dress code of the uniform, there is also the dress code of your facial hair, your actual hair as well. So that was quite amusing. Eventually, we managed to get the attention of one of the police officers, someone who I believe is a police officer or potentially like a chief inspector. I don't know what rank he is, but he was a guy in a business shirt and pants. He seemed to have access to some level of authority within the police force. He was at least able to get that information. He didn't seem to be one of the organizers of the protest, or at least one of the members of the Palestine Action Group in Sydney, because he wasn't wearing a high-vis jacket that said Palestine Action Group. So I feel like he was like one of the higher ranking officers of the law. He was also carrying a Palestinian flag, so kind of really confusing where he is. Like, well, I don't really know who he is. Maybe he is like a hilariously, actually very woke police officer, or like high-ranking police officer. I don't know. But apparently, for a solid hour, well after quite a lot of people had left the main area, he needed the go-ahead of the field commander of this particular protest in order to start letting more people in. And the field commander was asleep. Well, I cannot confirm nor deny he was asleep, but he definitely did not issue the command to allow more people to enter the main area for a solid hour, despite everyone with two eyes, 2 ears, a mouth, and, some brain cells to rub together, clearly seeing that the main area had already depleted of quite a lot of people as they had left for various reasons. It was clearly safe for the cops to allow more people through, but they didn't get the go-ahead from the field commander for another half hour. I think it was around about 6:40-ish, give or take. 6:45-ish, give or take, about an hour and a bit into the protest. That's when they finally let in more people. So, for the record, they had let in some people before, but then they stopped and they didn't let anyone in for like a good half hour, 45 minutes. So it was kind of ridiculous at that point. But yeah, by the time I managed to get up to the main area, that's when I was able to get a better idea of like who was speaking, get a much more clearer sense of what they were saying. It was, of course, the usual things that you would hear at a pro-Palestine, anti-genocidal apartheid state rally. So, if you've been to one, you've pretty much heard the same things for the most part. So, in the main area, we had someone from the MUA, I don't remember what that actually is, some kind of union, a workers' union spoke. We had one of the guys who I think is like the main leader of the Palestine Action Group, maybe. There was someone who was leading in chants. But what I think the speaker that I found most interesting, not necessarily because of what she was saying, but because of who she is, was someone from what I believe was the Labour Friends of Palestine. The Labour Friends of Palestine. Now, let me remind you, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Premier Chris Minns, they are both part of the Australian Labour Party. It is that same Labour who are trying to be the Labour Friends of Palestine, with which this particular speaker came from. And it's because she is ostensibly someone from the Labour Party speaking at a pro-Palestine, anti-genocidal apartheid state rally being from the party that actually let in President Genocide, naturally, she received quite a lot of boos. And it was brutal. It was brutal. On the one hand, kudos for showing up to a very antagonistic crowd. But then on the other hand, you have the power to not only deny entry to President Genocide, you also have the power to order, I think, the Australian Federal Police to go ahead and, I don't know, arrest President Genocide for war crimes and maybe, you know, do something with the International Criminal Court, because that's a thing that exists. I want to remind everyone now that the genocidal state, the genocidal apartheid state has been recognized as a perpetrator of genocide, ergo a war crime. The Prime Minister of the genocidal apartheid state, Benjamin Netanyahu, also known as Prime Minister of Genocide, he has been charged as a war criminal. There are now, like, things in place where if he were to step foot in a nation that actually cares about humanitarian rights and the international law, that he would be arrested on the spot. So I don't know. I think Australia could have had the hilarious opportunity to arrest President Genocide and just, you know, send him to The Hague. That could have been fun. But yeah, like, it just was curious that someone from the Labour Party ostensibly showed up to this anti-genocidal apartheid state rally. Now, after all of that was said and done, the Palestine Action Group moved on to try and organize a march. And in order to do that, they would have to actually engage in a variety of conversations and negotiations with the cops in order to actually organize that. Obviously, that would involve having to shut down even more roads, having to basically organize the police to sort of keep an eye on more things so that the protesters can march. And it ended up working out, as far as I understand. They were able to start a march down towards Central Station, which, for those playing at home, is south of Town Hall. But as that march began, I, at least personally, was able to witness from a distance, a fair bit of a distance, that arrests started happening at around 7:30-ish, give or take, 7:30-ish, 8-ish, give or take, because I was able to see the cops starting to carry people away. Apparently, pepper spray had been used at that moment in time. I saw people having to have their eyes washed because they were pepper sprayed. I came across mounted cops because in New South Wales, especially in the city, we actually have quite a lot of mounted cops, as it turns out. They do actually show up from time to time in non-protest scenarios, so, you know, it is what it is. And the cops really started to push everyone kind of in varying directions, but not necessarily away from the march if you wanted to join that. And it was at that moment that I decided it was time for me to leave, because my folks had told me that dinner was ready, so obviously it's time to go home. That was the extent of my experience of the anti-genocidal apartheid state rally. But, as it turns out, there were some things that I was not personally privy to, personally witnessing, that pretty much disillusion the notion that the cops who did not bring tasers this time around were going to be necessarily more chill than usual at these kinds of protests, because now on various social media sites, including the Sydney subreddit, there has been footage that has come out now of cops chasing protesters down Bathurst Street, which, for those playing at home, was actually, I believe it was in an area that would be north of Town Hall, so not necessarily where the march was happening. There is footage of also the cops, for some reason, beating up a somewhat old man. Now, the post that I came across this video of seems to suggest that the old man was a 50-year-old office worker. Is that true? I don't know. What was the reasoning behind the cops going completely, I don't know, ice Gestapo on him? I don't know. But that footage exists. So that happened. Cops went ahead and tripped over a bike, but also beat up this apparently 50-year-old man who apparently works at an office. I don't know. All of this to say, it still annoys me. And this goes back to the community post that I put out this morning, actually. I usually lean towards the Labour Party in Australia because in Australian politics, normally it's mainly a contest between the Australian Labour Party and the Australian Liberal Party. And the Australian Liberal Party is the party of someone like ScoMo, who was an absolute total disaster. I despise the Liberal Party. They basically made the NBN really, really bad. So in general, I tend to lean towards the Labour Party, and usually their policy goals and their policy decisions are ones that I more or less agree on. But whether it was because of mounting pressure from who the hell knows after the horrific attacks at Bondi Beach late last year, or whether it's because of something else, the Labour Party let in President genocide. And I really do find that to be wholly unacceptable and pretty much unforgivable at this point. And on top of that, there have also been anti-protest laws that have come about somehow as an answer, somehow as like a solution against something like the horrific attacks at Bondi Beach. Obviously, something like that is wildly unacceptable. It makes no sense. The attacks have nothing to do with protests. So naturally, and of course, it is the classic anti-free speech shenanigans. So yeah, it does seem to me the Labour Party right now is going through this weird moment of just unnecessary own goals that don't really make anyone feel safer. They don't make anyone feel better. They certainly don't help with the actually still ongoing genocide in Gaza and Palestine. All they do is limit speech, limit protest. They allow President Genocide to come in and do some big old PR tour of Australia, of all places. Yeah, I don't like what's happening. I don't like what's happening at all. And this is from a government that I would have voted in. Yeah, I don't like what's happening at all. 100%. If you want to learn more about what's been going on between the genocidal apartheid state and the state of Palestine, even after the quote-unquote ceasefire that the God Emperor had somehow managed to make a thing, there is a video that actually came out either today or yesterday from a YouTuber, Noah Samson. He has actually been documenting quite a lot of things that have happened since the ceasefire between the genocidal apartheid state and Palestine. As it turns out, the ceasefire is not a ceasefire. It's a ceasefire officially, only because it's the genocidal apartheid state apparently that gets to decide whether or not the ceasefire is still active. But anyone with a pair of eyes and a couple of brain cells to rub together can easily see that when you have even more children killed directly, even more like groups of people, schools bombed for no discernible reason whatsoever, It's not a ceasefire. It's an ongoing genocide. It's just slower. And fun fact, I don't like ongoing genocides. And so at the end of the day, I know there will be people who will maybe come across this video and think, wow, all you care about is the one that's happening between the genocidal apartheid state and Palestine. What about XYZ? There are, for the record, other atrocities, other genocides that are actually ongoing. Sudan is one that comes to mind. I'm not that familiar with it. I'm just not that familiar with it, okay? But even my very limited understanding, I, of course, do not support what is going on in Sudan. I just don't like people getting genocided. I don't know why sometimes that sounds like a radical take. It's not. That's it. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. If you're from Sydney, did you go and see it? What did you witness? Because maybe because I came from the segregated part and was slowly moving through the crowd, maybe that's why I didn't come across any of the real hustle and bustle and any of the real violence from both the cops and I guess maybe a protester or two. I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. But what did you witness? Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, hope you guys enjoy this. If you like this kind of content, then of course hit that like button. Feel free to subscribe, but I don't normally make this kind of content. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.